Carl Moberg. I am the CTO of Avassa here in Stockholm, Sweden. And I've brought with me today my smiley face demo god, Fredrik Jansson, who is taking us through the motions, this time around about operational security and how we protect sites and associated secrets from various types of attacks in a distributed fashion. So here's what's happening. That's what the drama is. We have just gotten word that one of our theater locations has gotten physically broken into. And our security protocol, which is short and to the point, tells us that we need to immediately block the site from accessing secrets. We need to retract its ability to read things from Strongbox, basically, right? Because if you get physical control over the site, you can normally, if you're a gifted person, get access to the containers and therefore the secret store. And proactively, we will rotate the secrets for this particular service that's running on this location across all other sites, because who knows, they may have already gotten to it, so we have to rotate the rest. We can abandon this site, block it, and we rotate the rest. And what happens when we block a site is we actually rotate every system level keying material, all system level keying material under the hoods here. And this is, of course, a line of defense against extraction of system level keying material from one host in one site, and using that as a leverage to attack other hosts in other sites. So we need to immediately rotate that as an automatic side effect. And we will find out down the line here that the perpetrators eventually got caught before they reached our precious computers, and we will go ahead and reattach and unblock the site.
And how's that done? Is that through like a help desk call, that portion, or?
That was it was a red phone over here that just rang. And that's why I went off camera for a while, and they told me there's a break. Yeah.
So it's not something that they could be used to DDoS a site either, to say pretend it was stolen.
Probably, if they actually were managed to convince our security tactical team, that's probably an attack vector worth thinking of for the next round of red teaming, physical red teaming. So we're gonna block the site, rotate the application credentials, and after we got that relieving call, we will unblock the Stockholm site and restore normal operations. And with that, I will, for the last time, actually hand over to you, Fredrik.
Thank you, Carl. So now I'm gonna close this one. Since I'm not Joe anymore, I'm gonna head back to the admin Fredrik of the theater corporation here, and we will admit to one thing, that this application does something that is strictly forbidden. We fired the developer, but it actually logs to the application logs the password that it reads from Strongbox. Stupid thing.
It just so happened to work spectacularly when demoing today. That it actually prints out the secret material, so we can show you that it changes. But like Fredrik said, they were summarily fired, and won't be working for us anymore.
But again, good thing now, because now we can see that each site reads the very secret password, the password from Strongbox, and logs that on the application log, and we pick that up and watch that here. As Carl said, we just got the call that the Stockholm site may have been compromised. So what I will do is, I can't do this in the UI yet. I will actually go here and I will do subcontrol block site Stockholm. And by doing that, the Stockholm site, it basically throws away its encryption keys and puts itself in a state where you can't really, it doesn't even have the keys anymore to read the encrypted data that it sits on. And the application, you will see later, won't be able to talk to the APIs. It will definitely not be able to read the secrets anymore. But just to be sure, we're going to head into Strongbox, go into this operations vault, and I'm going to change the configuration. So I'll switch the password from the password to secret password. No one will ever guess that. Secret password. And when I hit update vault here, the new password will actually be distributed to all sites where this application is running, which were the European sites. So I should see now, if I head back into logs here, let's pick Amsterdam, and start looking at the logs, you can see that it used to be the password, but Amsterdam is now picking up the new password that I put into Strongbox that was distributed across the system and is now sent to Amsterdam. The Stockholm site is none the wiser. It's even so. If I try to retrieve logs from Stockholm, I can't, because the only thing the Stockholm site can do at this moment is be reinstalled, or if we allow it, which we'll do momentarily, we say that we're going to unblock it. We're going to allow it back into the system. Then we can actually start talking to it again and retrieve logs. So since we got the call that they didn't make it all the way to the Stockholm site, I'm going to issue the command unblock site. So choose Stockholm, retrieve logs, and now you should actually see logs coming in here. And so you can see this log actually tells me that it was offline for a while, but we reattached to it. And as you can see, now it actually got the new password that we sent throughout the system. It was able to read that and is now back online and ready for action again.
You could have seen actually on that log list that it was quiet between 1628 and 1642 or something, where it obviously was offline.
Yes.
A question, are those logs shipped up to the CloudWatch? Is the actual password going to be in those logs?
So unfortunately, the developer that did that application, who's been summarily fired, made that mistake to actually publish on the logging out of the application, not out of our infrastructure, the password. Yeah. So that was a bad mistake. Shouldn't have done that. That's a huge no-no. But it just so happened to work really well in a demo environment like this. So it wasn't the actual Avassa system publishing that. It was the application developer that snafu'd the living bejesus out of that situation. But it's to our benefit.
So for operations,
a concern.
Yeah. So for operations people, it's akin to we'll just turn the firewall off because then it runs better.
Same thing, same spirit. Yeah.
Those who were responsible for the sacking have also been sacked by those that have been sacked that were responsible for the sacking.
And it's an HR issue at this point. Yeah. All righty.
Replace them with singing llamas, right?
Something like that. Team, we actually reached the goal. We have now fulfilled the entirety of the general and simplified requirements. And it seems like the vendor that we are exploring here, at least through this lens, fits the bill. So that's probably worth some sort of celebration.
Hey, Carl.
Yep, go for it.
I'd like to celebrate with another can of worms, if I could.
How about it?
So yeah, something that came up in the side channel was the CLI. Some of the CLI commands didn't seem to confirm that the change was pushed or took effect. Is there an option, or would you consider an option to do like a verbose output from them to make sure that the site was blocked or unblocked or some other change was made? Or is that just sort of a anti-DevOps, go look at the log kind of thing?
As a product manager, I will do what you wanted to do, but I will also ask my engineering buddy, Fredrik, what would you say to that?
So, I mean, knowing the command line really well, we do, if something fails, if I try to do an operation against the system, it will return, it will print an error and set an appropriate error code. So should I put it in a script and use the command line tool for scripting, I can actually script against it. And I know that should it fail, I can make the script fail. But absolutely, I think there are more verbose. I think we've taken the choice that if everything goes well, it kind of stays Swedish silent. It doesn't say much. Yeah. Should something fail, though, it will print an error and set the appropriate error code.
Okay, so no good news is good news with Gary Gnu. Got it.
Yeah, exactly right.
combining the last two bullet points together for your tenant third-party access to make sure it's secure and can't break the underlying environment, is that run in a sandbox type environment, or is it just running side by side?
So okay, yes, another kind of worms. So the actual scheduling and data access is, of course, managed by the edge enforcer. Then it depends on the kind of container runtime you're running on, right? So because that's usually where this question goes, right? And if you run on a containerd backed Docker, you will have the, I would say, not super harsh separation of concern provided by Linux containers through containerd. So for environments where you need deeper isolation, of course, we run fine on other types of isolation technologies that can provide a more hard isolation between container instances, like Kata containers and others. But for the data and the scheduling, it's all managed tenant specific by the scheduler, including the keying material, which is really important, meaning that we have site keys, we have host keys, and we also have tenant-specific encryption for the data and for the applications. That was a couple of worms out of the can, I hope, or did that lead to further questions at this point?
So go on, Carl. I'm going to ask a question. It's kind of been eating away at me through most of the demo, and so you have to excuse this might be an absolute idiot of a question. I'm not a dev guy. I don't write software for a living.
This is a safe space, Paul. This is a safe space.
Yeah, good. I'm amongst friends. That's nice.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm looking at this, and absolutely, I see the logic. I can see why you would want to be able to manage at scale, at massive scale, application deployment, application maintenance, some of the stuff that you're doing there in terms of security, etc. I get all of that. I suppose the one thing that's gnawing away at me is, are we saying that there is nobody doing this? There's people who have got applications at scale who are deploying like this. Your movie theater example. That movie theater probably exists doing exactly that. So if they're not aware of Avassa, are they using something else to do that, or are they just doing it themselves, or is it just a Wild West and they've got no control?
There are two types of users I talk to. One is trying to apply, if you remember my kind of first slide, tools that were designed for the left side to the right side. That will work fine for 5 sites, for 10 sites, 15 to 20 sites. Then they will start to feel the pain. And then they start thinking about distributed security. They start thinking about tenancy, about logging, all the stuff that we showed here today. And they realize that this will be tough, if not impossible, when we start hitting tens or hundreds. So they're trying, well, and who can blame them, to use their tools that they know and love from the public cloud. The other types of users use tools that are specific to applications or even industry verticals. So if you talk to someone from Industry 4.0, lovely term, they will have very specific sets of tools for their particular applications. Of course, what we're thinking here is that eventually that kind of vertical integration will come apart and general compute will prevail, and containers seem to be a good way of packaging applications. Apart from that, no, there is no other vendor, as far as we know this far, which is good and bad, right, that have this kind of setup and that have thought about this particular environment and this particular set of constraints that we so conveniently have on our slide in front of us here. And of course, we think that this will be a fairly major part of the industry going forward. They will eventually figure that the things that I'm showing on this slide here is going to be part of their daily operations.
Yeah, so this is very much about a kind of making something available to the enterprise that either they're struggling along to do in one way with either, taking your example, tools that don't scale, or something that's been very built custom for a single application. But I'm a fan of this idea, don't get me wrong, the idea that you're abstracting that complexity into an enterprise tool that they can go away and can purchase, place inside their network, and give them both the ability to do the devy bit underneath, but also give them a level. And I appreciate from you guys, you know, I've had the feeling a couple of times, you know, and I think you've been honest about it. It's very much a version 1. There's things that you want to start adding into this. There's already gaps that you've recognized, and some of them you've covered today. But yeah, you're kind of seeing this as you're giving the enterprise both that ability to deliver, as well as kind of abstracting that to give levels of management and dashboarding and security that, you know, that the CTO is desperate. The CTO doesn't want to troubleshoot containers. He wants to see a thing in a dashboard so he can go to his management meeting with a report. You know, that's generalizing somewhat.
No, exactly. And yeah, thank you for doing that, so I don't have to. Excellent. And it's really about lowering the barrier of entry for this kind of environment, right? To go from bespoke, weird, that modern developers and DevOps neither like nor care for, because they will then try to avoid it, into something that actually lands in their court. That's why we carefully picked, of course, showing how to do this with GitLab, showing how to do this with AWS, asking a developer team or developer operations team to repurpose their whole way of working just because it so happens that their applications are running in a distributed fashion, we know is a no-go. So we're really trying to build a system that developers and DevOps love, not just stand for or kind of can live with, but something they can actually lean into and really like and want to work with.
Carl, question for you. I'm loving how this is all playing around, and I've got a billion things in my head that this could potentially be used for. What I'm thinking though is on the database side of the world, we have all these persistent data files that we need to deal with. How does the system at all deal with mounting persistent storage into a container so that you could run things like databases in a container and deploy those at scale to all your sites for like database driven apps and stuff like that?
Yes, it sure does. It relies heavily. And, you know, one of the enabling technologies, we couldn't have started this company or built this system without assuming that containers will do the heavy lifting here. Everything you can do with a container, generally, you can, of course, do through us, right? So anything you can put in a Docker file or ask the surrounding system to do for your container runtime is a pass-through. You can think of it for us. So for sure. I know this is also a moving part of the industry. I believe there was a presentation previously here at TFD or Tech Field Day 24 that dove really deep into storage for containerized applications. So we're a little careful on picking sides, but we generally say that, look, the container abstraction will provide hopefully what you need. And if that's the case, then it's all transparent to a system like this.
All right, very cool. Thanks.
I have a question. If I was a complete idiot and went in and deleted a container from a site that should have an application deployed, is it a stateful setup whereby your system will recognize that it should have that application and redeploy it?
Absolutely. Okay. So the scheduler takes charge of making sure you can, in database terms, you can think of this system as a model-driven and eventually consistent scheduler. So you tell the top level what to do, and it goes to work and make that eventually over time true to the extent that it can. There's a whole other aspect of this system that we don't have time to talk about today, is if you deploy across 100 sites in real world scenarios, you know that at least 2 sites will be out of pocket. One of them will be a planned outage, and one will be accidental. So what do? Do you declare success after failing 2, or do you have another type of watermark, right? But yes, it is at the core of the control plane here to make sure that both across sites, but also inside sites, that what we've promised to the end user holds true. There might be situations, so that's another gigantic kind of worms. Think of a 3-site cluster like the one Fredrik brought up initially. Let's say 2 of the hosts are very weak in terms of resources, and it's running an application on the 3rd host that's a little bit of a beefier server. Now that beefier server fails, and suddenly the scheduler is out of options for the needs for that application container. So it needs to report back to say, due to partial outage, I'm actually failing to deploy this container now because it's not fulfilling the expectations. So there's a whole slew of really, really interesting, almost computer science-like problems and challenges to tackle here in order to provide that nice and ergonomic abstraction to the northbound interface and to the tools that people use. That is ours to fix. That is ours to solve for. Yeah.
But I do think we have what you would expect. If a container dies, we're gonna restart it. If a host dies, we're gonna try to reschedule what was running on that host on a different host if your site has multiple hosts. So in the normal case, I'd say we do a pretty good job of keeping the applications up and running.
And is this automatical, or should we ask it an administrator to do this, to redeploy or to redistribute or what?
It's automatic. It's automatic. But that's another kind of worms. I like to serve kind of worms back to
Can be not
yes.
automatic. I mean,
Yes.
is it possible? Okay.
Yes, for sure.
I'm afraid of disaster recovery automatics.
Yeah. No, I got you. It's like, as I said, I like to throw kind of worms back. And we're having deeper conversations with some users when we say things like, if you bring up a new site and it has a label that matches an already deployed application, would you like for us to automatically just go and deploy that? And most people go, my head hurts. Let me think about that. And generally that's then a weak no. I want to do that as a manual step. I want to check that it does what I think it's going to do. So that whole control loop also in a distributed environment, no surprise here, by the way, that's a general thing in computer science, is tricky to operate.
Can you share any of your future plans? Where are you going to be putting a lot of dev time into? Where's it going?
Yeah, so we're happy enough about the general abstractions and the mechanisms at the core of this. Now comes the time to actually make sure this works with everybody's tooling. So we'll put a lot of work into what Fredrik just showed you, making sure that this kind of application or API is easy to turn up for the tooling that's already in place. Look, again, we're not going to ask development teams to repurpose their tooling and how they work. So we're going to be diligently working towards integrating with all the cloud tool chains, all the on-prem or private cloud tool chains, and just make sure that it's easy peasy to connect whatever you're doing today and the tools you're using today to an Avassa site or to an Avassa managed network, and also work with quite a bit of application companies, people building applications for the edge, and just make sure that their applications are flying in our environment, because they're also struggling, and that's a whole other kind of worms, with finding a reliable way of distributing their applications for the purposes that they were built for, and they don't necessarily want to build something like what we have, but rather sit on something that we have. So those are two very important kind of trajectories for us, and of course keep hammering on the web UI. You guys have carefully and constructively pointed out some shortcomings that will just increase the quality of the day for people using it.
Last one on that, can you put username before password?
Yes, next version, we got that. Yep, done. Here's my product manager nodding. Yeah.
Carl, I have a quick question. I noticed that in one of the UIs as the demo was going on, that there was application monitoring, and I'm sure that is just, you know, how the application's been deployed. Do you have goals for helping the customer troubleshoot the application? What kind of metrics are you going to keep to help them?
Cool. So I try to tease apart, for the purpose of applications in general, monitoring and observability. I know there's a big debate here, and I'm known for having said before at Gestalt events that observability is just a hipster way of talking about monitoring. But I will say that there's three layers to monitor a container-based application. It's the actual container runtime. It is the fact that the container lives, and then you can also have, let's call it synthetic tests. So you can send HTTP requests and make sure that the application is not only alive, but actually responds to that. Mm-hmm. Now, that data we expose, right, to the end user. And when that fails, that's when observability generally comes in, meaning that you actually want to poke into the failing part and see what happened before and what's happening now, if anything. And for that, we have that log and distributed queries and other really cool features. That's probably meat for another TFD. The opportunity from a central point to actually attach a console to a container to actually watch the application from the inside, and that actually traverses NATs and works over a secure infrastructure and so forth. So we're absolutely shooting for doing basic application monitoring based on container best practices, and observability through distributed queries and things like interactive shells into the containers that are failing or are deemed at failing. So for sure. And Betty, this is another can of worms because it is so different. Again, we've had this conversation, right? We have application teams that run large applications, 20 containers in one availability zone and 20 containers in another, right? For them, it's kind of intuitive and trivial to understand what it means. Right. When we tell them, look, how are you going to observe an application across 200 locations? What does it even mean to observe that kind of application? So we're deeply looking forward to having that conversation with users and the industry as a whole. How do we think about observability, super distributed environments?
So you're not actually going to tell me any metrics.
So the metrics are the ones that we showed. I don't. Maybe you can help me, Fredrik, if there are others. Finally, a little bit of a tech field day feeling to this conversation.
Really, drag him into it.
I like it. So CPU and memory. What else, Fredrik, do we actually get out of the box?
Yeah, so then you can set up storage quotas to measure how much data is put on disk and actually put a quota on that, and you can get reports on disk usage. You get network metrics, how many packets and bytes are flowing in and out of the application.
Of the application, though, that's important. Not the host, the application.
Yes, no, on the application level. Those are the things that on top of my mind. So CPU, memory, disk, and network.